And this is to go even further beyond.
What's the best part about Santa Monica Studios? I think it's their fascination with Norse mythology and incorporating so many elements of it into their game. The best example is Atreus unintentionally causing the death of Balder, which is similar to the mythological tale of Loki having Balder killed with a mistletoe arrow. They incorporated a lot of mythology into the 2018 God of War. For example, all of the gods mentioned in the game: Odin, Thor, Balder, Freya, Freyr, Njord, Magni, Modi, Tyr, and so on. These are all Norse gods and goddesses, still talked about today. Ragnarok has been mentioned in today's pop culture numerous times. Hollywood thrives off of Ragnarok, but there are many names in Norse mythology that are never mentioned in God of War. Sif, which is Thor's wife, Heimdall, the guardian of Asgard, Vidar and Vali are also sons of Odin, which are never mentioned. Gungnir, Odin's spear made by the dwarves. Odin's horse, Sleipnir, a beast with 8 legs and faster than any other horse. Odin's 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin. There's another very important beast nobody mentions, and that's Fenrir, a wolf created by Loki. In mythology, Loki is inadvertently responsible for the creation of Thor's hammer, Odin's spear, Odin's horse Sleipnir, and the wolf Fenrir. Loki is also responsible for cutting off Sif's hair and stealing Thor's hammer. Now let's compare the mythology with the game. In the game, there are many events that take place without any mention of Loki. In the game, Hrimthur built the wall and won the bet.
So Hrimthur adopted the guise of an ordinary man and made the Aesir an offer. He would build them majestic new walls, and if he couldn't build them within 2 turns of the season, they would owe him nothing for his labors.
But in mythology, Loki is the one who persuaded the gods to make a bet with Hrimthur, and also to build the wall around Asgard. In mythology, Hrimthur lost the bet because of Loki. Not only that, but Odin's horse, Sleipnir, was created by Loki. In the game, Sleipnir is depicted in shrines, and seemingly exists without Loki ever having created it. In mythology, Loki, having turned himself into a mare, lured Hrimthur's horse away, and when Loki returned much later, he returned with an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. In the game, Brock and Sindri are responsible for the creation of Thor's hammer, but mythology shows us that Loki is actually the one responsible for its creation and the creation of Odin's spear. Without going into too much detail, Loki, as a prank perhaps, cut off Sif's hair. Thor was livid when he discovered this and knew it was Loki who had done it. Loki reassured Thor that he would make things right. Loki organized a contest between the son of Ivaldi and the Holder brothers, Brock and Sindri. Whoever presented the gods with the 3 greatest gifts would win a contest, and the sons of Ivaldi gifted Sif new hair made of gold, Odin was gifted a spear, Freyr was gifted a folding boat, Brock and Sindri gifted Odin a golden bracelet which would multiply, Freyr was gifted a golden boar, and Thor was gifted his hammer, Mjolnir. In the game, Thrym stole Thor's hammer. In mythology, it was Loki who stole it and gave it to Thrym. As seen in the shrines in God of War, Loki has been removed from the story of Thrym and Thor. Loki's been removed from the story of Hrimthur building the walls of Asgard. Loki has also been removed from the story of Brock and Sindri creating Thor's hammer. In fact, Mimir mentions the story of Ymir, the first giant, and we see this story depicted in a shrine. In the shrine, Odin already possesses both his spear and his horse, Sleipnir. So how can this be? Well, Santa Monica Studios, they've done stuff like this before. For example, Mimir's head was carried by Odin in mythology, whereas the game depicts Kratos being the one to carry Mimir. Similarly, in mythology, Laufey is a goddess, whereas her husband, Farbody, is a giant. This is reversed in the game. Kratos, who is called Farbody by the giants in the game, is a god, whereas Faye is the giant. It could be that Santa Monica has done the same thing here. Because Atreus is only 13, there'd be no way for him to be responsible for the creation of Odin's spear or horse. So what's the point of Atreus being Loki if he's been removed from all these stories? Well, Loki is also responsible for the creation of Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Fenrir, the wolf. And this is going to be a major part in the next game. Mimir mentions that Skoll and Hati are the children of Hrothvitnir.
They were born of the archwolf Hrothvitnir, a great nemesis of the Aesir gods.
This confused me when Mimir said this, because I had thought that Skoll and Hati were the children of Fenrir. But after a little research, I found out that Fenrir was known as Hrothvitnir. I don't even know why I'm trying to pronounce this. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. But that word, it means famous monster. And that was one of the names that Fenrir had in mythology. This would indicate that Skoll and Hati are in fact the children of Fenrir, and Fenrir is the child of Loki. Remember that prophecy carved in the stone at the end of the game? You'll notice that there are 3 wolves standing alongside Atreus. I believe them to be Fenrir, Skoll, and Hati. Atreus is still young in this carving, so what does that mean? I believe that Atreus will have 3 wolves in God of War Ragnarok, either at the start of the game or just before the end of Fimbulwinter. Didn't Mimir mention that Odin had already cast Skoll and Hati into the sky?
But when the sun and moon grew mutinous and stood still, Odin put Skoll and Hati to use. With his ancient magics, he cast the wolves to the heavens, and they began their chase.
Well, just as Jormungandr's shrine depicts what the future has in store, I think it's a fair assumption that the same might apply to Skoll and Hati. After all, the sun and moon are supposed to rebel against Odin and not move, according to Mimir. Well, you ever notice that Midgard, throughout the course of the entire first game, never changes from day to night? I believe that this is because the sun is in rebellion against Odin. In the second game, I would not be surprised if Odin cast Skoll and Hati into the sky so the sun may move again. Let me give you some backstory on Tyr from mythology. Tyr and Fenrir have an interesting relationship, to say the least. Tyr had the best relationship with Fenrir of all the gods, but they did not stay on friendly terms forever. Fenrir soon grew to be very large, and when he became a concern, the gods of Asgard built magical chains that Fenrir would not be able to escape from. The gods presented Fenrir with the chains and promised him that he would not be chained forever. Fenrir sensed that they might be deceiving him, so Fenrir asked that one of the gods put their hand in his mouth as insurance that he would not be chained up permanently. However, when the shackle closed around Fenrir's neck, he knew that he had been deceived. So he bit down on Tyr's hand, ripping it off. Tyr would then be labeled the one-handed god. But what does this have to do with the game? Well, in the same stone carving prophecy, Atreus appears to be young when he is sitting beside a man who appears to be dying. I believe that man to be Tyr, not Kratos. Notice that every depiction of Tyr in each shrine reveals Tyr to have 2 hands. I think that's because Fenrir does not exist yet, and Tyr's hand has also not been bitten off yet. Here's where Santa Monica is very clever. They purposefully remove a portion of that stone carving so you, as the audience, would assume that it was Kratos. It's hard to say whether or not Tyr is dying in this depiction, but another good question to ask would be, what is coming out of Atreus' mouth? It looks like it's script. Could it possibly be a song? Is it a creature? I think in this stone carving, it's depicting what will happen between Atreus and Tyr in the second game. I think a snake will come out of Atreus' mouth, and that snake will grow into the world serpent. Now in mythology, Loki has many more children, but I don't believe that they're going to be incorporated in the game because a lot of the mythology involves Loki being with numerous women. And I definitely don't see Atreus being a 13-year-old boy or even a 16-year-old boy being in a relationship with any women in this story. Now that we've talked about all that, let's talk about the game and how it's going to be based off the mythology we have. I think the game will start out with Odin hunting down Atreus for the death of Balder. This is exactly what happens in mythology. But unlike mythology, I don't believe Atreus will be punished in the same way Loki was in the old stories. In the tales, Loki was chained up while poison slowly dripped onto his head throughout the years until Ragnarok. This same punishment wouldn't make any sense in the beginning of a game. If they captured Atreus in the game and we didn't see him until Ragnarok, I think a lot of people would feel as though Atreus served no purpose throughout the story. I do believe that events in God of War Ragnarok will take place similarly to how they do in the mythology. In the ancient stories, there are several warnings which will appear when Ragnarok is coming. First, a rooster is going to crow in each realm of the supernatural: Hel, Jotunheim, and Asgard. Although we can't find all the roosters, I think we actually can find one in the first game. Many people have wondered what this bird in Hel is. I believe that this will be one of the 3 roosters to crow at the beginning of Ragnarok in the second game. Let's get back to the warnings. In Hel, a beast named Garmr will break loose from its chains just before Ragnarok. Even to this day, people debate whether Garmr and Fenrir are the same or not. So let's talk about that. Have you guys heard of the Prose Edda? It's one of the few books written in Iceland a century after the close of the Viking Age. In the book, Snorri writes that Fenrir and Garmr are different beings, but they may depict this differently in the game. Once the roosters crow and Garmr escapes, the great horn of Heimdall will blow in Asgard. Skull and Hati will devour the sun and moon, and that will signal Surtr to begin his march to Asgard. Afterwards, a ship will sail from Jotunheim to Asgard, according to mythology. The ship will contain giants and monsters on board, along with Loki having escaped his chains. Loki will be captain of the ship and fight against the Aesir. I think there's a good chance that this last part definitely happens in the game. I can easily see Atreus leading the Jotunheim to Asgard. According to mythology, several fights are fated to take place. Surtr against Freyr, young Jormungandr against Thor, Tyr against Garmr, Loki against Heimdall, and Fenrir against Odin. This is where it gets a little messy. We are missing 2 key characters, Kratos and Freya. It could be that they fight each other, and if they do, I don't believe Kratos will kill Freya. But let's say that Kratos and Freya join the same side. What then? Well, let's say that Tyr does die, as I predicted. Should the God of War fight Garmr? That doesn't sound fitting, does it? And what about Jormungandr? He's supposed to be knocked back in time after clashing with Thor. In mythology, both Thor and Jormungandr are supposed to kill each other. But what if that didn't happen? Even though many of these fights happen in mythology, that does not mean it'll happen the same way in the game. What if, in the game, young Jormungandr was knocked back in time, so Kratos would have to fight Thor instead? So let's say Kratos and Thor have a humongous battle, a huge clash, a clash so large that the sky opens up. Eventually, both Thor and Kratos gradually weaken, but Kratos appears to be winning. Then, at the last second, something interferes with their fight, and Kratos goes down. Then, just as Thor is about to finish Kratos off, older Jormungandr steps in,
NANI?
fights Thor, and bites him. Both Jormungandr and Thor die in the process, thus fulfilling the prophecy. Let's say that Magni and Modi's sister does not show up in the battle, because Kratos defeats her earlier in the game. Who would Freya fight? I think it would make perfect sense for her to fight against Odin. So here's our new fighting lineup. Thor and Odin versus Surtr. This is going to be the first thing that happens, just as the prophecy states.
His destiny is to fall at the hands of Thor and Odin, but in so doing, strike the blow that leaves their realm in ash and ruin.
So the way I see it, I believe that Surtr is going to complete his mission and begin the burning of Asgard halfway through the game. And the remaining half of the game, after Surtr dies, young Jormungandr versus Thor will lead to Kratos and Loki versus Thor, which will then lead to old Jormungandr versus Thor. Kratos and Atreus will live, Jormungandr and Thor will die. These fights will occur halfway through the game. Kratos will obtain Thor's hammer, and Asgard will begin to burn entirely. Towards the end of the game, Freyr will fight Kratos. And Freyr, since he's the brother of Freya, he's going to be a very strong adversary. But now that you have Thor's hammer, it'll be a little bit easier than before. Fenrir versus Garmr will take place, and that makes sense to me because it's wolf against wolf, and I imagine both of them will die. Loki will fight Heimdall, and Heimdall will die, and then Odin will fight Freya, and Freya will die at the end of the game. In my mind, it makes perfect sense that Freya will die. I think it'd be an incredibly sad end to such a beloved character, and despite her dying here, hopefully there'll still be a little bit of closure between her and Kratos, because maybe Kratos will receive the opportunity to fight her earlier in the game, and then they can exchange some dialogue. Once Asgard has almost been completely consumed, Odin will flee after killing Freya, which will lead to the third game. This was a lot of hard work, but I had a really good time. And I'll tell you what, I'll be happy if I'm right, and I'll be happy if I'm wrong, because this is an amazing franchise, and I'm just really excited for the next game to come out. God of War is a game that I played many times, and I will always look back on it with fond memories. I really enjoyed doing this with you guys, and this is probably the last video of God of War I'm going to be doing for a while. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.